The sad case of the Murugappan family, taken from their home in Biloela in Queensland and detained for the past 3 years, has dragged on for too long. Since their detention in 2018, the plight of the Sri Lankan-born mother and father and their 2 young daughters has become a rallying point for critics of Australia's tough border policies. The Murugappans were taken from their small town where they had lived for several years in Queensland and sent at huge taxpayer expense to the remote Christmas Island detention facility until they exhausted their appeals against deportation. The case grabbed headlines again this week because the younger of the 2 girls, Tharunicaa, was flown to a Perth hospital and diagnosed with septicemia and pneumonia. When asked about the future of this family, the federal government couldn't even get their lines right. On Tuesday, it seemed it was going to try and settle the family in New Zealand or the United States. Here's Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews, followed by Foreign Affairs Minister Marise Payne.
Does the government not have the discretion to be able to make a decision on this?
We are going through the process now of investigating a range of resettlement options in relation to a number of different circumstances.
I understand the United States is the first of those, and that New Zealand is also an option.
So there they were on Tuesday. It was resettlement in New Zealand or the United States. Unfortunately, though, it seems the government was confused about its own laws, and they hadn't worked out that this was not really an option. And so yesterday, they changed their tune. Here is the Home Affairs Minister again.
It's not a case of being mean. We are very strong as a government in our policy in relation to our border protection. These are long-standing policies. And quite frankly, I'm not going to have people die trying to come to Australia by sea on my watch. So let's not forget the history that we've had here.
The sad, ongoing, costly and cruel detention of this family can be brought to an end today with the stroke of a pen by Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews. These girls were born in Australia, and this is a show of heartlessness towards Australian children. Australia's immigration laws explicitly allow for exemptions to be made, and this is a good time to make an exemption. Even if their parents did breach Australia's immigration laws, keeping children in prolonged detention is an act of cruelty and a denial of basic human rights. The Mercy Dash to Perth has raised serious questions about whether the young girls can be properly cared for on Christmas Island. How could we have gotten to this point as a country where a young 3-year-old child has to become so seriously ill, almost near death, before our government acts? It is time for Minister Andrews to show some generosity, compassion and the fair go that is supposed to be a hallmark of Australia. There's a regional town in Queensland that wants this family back. I know there are Liberal Party members, supporters and backbenchers who are getting nervous about the Biloela family and want the government to just resolve it and let them come home. Some of you might even be watching this program. So my message to Liberals who want this to come to an end is simple. Speak out. Tell your minister publicly it is time for the Biloela family to come home to Queensland. It is time. What is the point of being engaged in politics and public debate unless you're willing to use your voice for justice, compassion and a fair go when it is needed? And this, surely, Rita, is one of those times.
Oh, Nicholas, really? I mean, if you seriously think this is something that coalition voters want the government to weaken on, I think you're very much mistaken. And if you think this is something that the coalition is scared about, again, I think you're mistaken, because whenever border protection is talked about, it is something that the coalition's record stands alone. We saw your compassionate policies. We saw the impact of that. We saw more than 1,200 men, women and children drowning on our borders. I bet you can't name a single one of those people who drowned on our borders, thanks to policies that are tough being weakened in the name of compassion. There's not much compassionate about drowned children and their families. And in this particular case, of course, everybody feels sorry for these children and they even feel sorry for the parents. But the reality is that they're not genuine refugees. Every court and tribunal that's heard their case has come to the same conclusion, that they're not genuine refugees. I wish it was different. I wish they could come and be found to be genuine refugees and settle in Australia and have wonderful lives. But that has been the fact. This has gone to the Federal Magistrates Court. It's gone to the Federal Court. It's even gone to the High Court and taken years and years, taken an enormous amount of public money, and each decision has been the same. They're not genuine refugees. They have to go back to Sri Lanka, like thousands of others who've had to go back or who've been found not to be genuine refugees and have had to go back to their countries. So that's my question to you, Nick. Why are they in detention? Why are they not in Sri Lanka?
Rita, you or I could go for a walk along St Kilda Beach tonight, or Bondi Beach if you're in Sydney, and you'd probably spot a dozen Irish backpackers, Poms, Germans who had overstayed their visa in Australia. But we don't spend tens of millions of dollars sending these people off to detention on Christmas Island, which is what we've done with this family. Now, look, they're claiming that they want to stay in Australia because they're seeking asylum here because they're from a Tamil minority group in Sri Lanka and they fear political persecution
over in Sri Lanka
if they went back. Now, at some point, don't you say, look, right or wrong here, they've been living in Queensland for years. They've got now two children, two beautiful daughters who were born here in Australia. At some point, don't you say, OK, we're going to make an exception here, as is allowed under the Act, and let these people stay?
So you can't answer the question, why are they in Sri Lanka? The family have gone back to Sri Lanka, the father certainly has, on at least 3 occasions, 2 whilst the war still was happening. Now the war is over and you're telling me they can't, like many others since the war ended, go back and resettle there? I mean, that is the question that these activists cannot answer.